Example 1, Cameron is saving for his retirement 24 years from now by setting up a saving plan. He has set up a saving plan where he will deposit $94 at the end of every 3 months for the next 14 years. Interest is 5% compounded quarterly. Part A, how much money will be in his account on the date of his retirement? When we're solving for this question, our first step is to draw a timeline so we can visualize what is going on in the question. So in the question, we have Cameron saving for his retirement for 24 years from now. So we have a total of 24 years, so from time 0 all the way to time 24. And in this question, where we have 2 time periods, we have the first 14 years, and then we have the next 10 years. So we have 2 time periods. And what the question is saying is that in the first 14 years, Cameron will be depositing $94 at the end of every 3 months. So that means in the first 14 years, our payments, our PMT is $94. The reason the $94 is a PMT is because it satisfies both conditions of an annuity. So the $94 is an equal amount, and then we have equal time interval because the payments are made at the end of every 3 months. So equal amount, equal time interval. So therefore, this is considered a PMT. So we're depositing $94 at the end of every 3 months. So it's repeated at a regular time interval, and every 3 months, we're depositing $94. So the amount is the same every period. So that's why in the first 14 years, we have PMT of $94. And then after 14 years, there are no more payments. Our PMT is 0. So after 14 years, the money is just sitting in the bank, and the money is earning interest at the 5% compounded quarterly. So even though there are no payment in the next 10 years, Cameron is still earning interest on the deposit at the 5% compounded quarterly. And in part A, what we're solving for is how much money Cameron will have in his account on the date of his retirement. So at the end of 24 years, we're solving for the future value, and that's what we're ultimately solving for. So the steps that we need to take to solve for the future value at the end of 24 years is that we need to first find the future value at the end of 14 years. Once we find the future value at the end of 14 years with the payment of $94, then we can solve for the future value at the end of 24 years. So first, find the future value at the end of 14 years. Once we find that, then we can solve for the future value at the end of 24 years. So when we set up our line of boxes, we have 2 lines. The first line is for the first 10 years, and the second line is for the next 10 years. So we need to first solve for the future value at the end of the first 14 years. We need to solve for the future value at the end of the first 14 years. Once we solve for the future value at the end of the first 14 years, that becomes the present value for the next 10 years. And that's the connection point. And then we're going to use that to solve for the future value at the end of the 24 years. And that's the concept that you need to understand. So that's why it is important for us to draw the diagram at the beginning so you can visualize what is going on. So in the question, we're given that interest rate is 5% compounded quarterly. So our CY is 4. Compounding per year is 4 times a year. So our CY is 4. And then we have 5%. So that's why our IY is 5%. And that applies for both the first 14 years as well as the next 10 years. So 5% is IY, and then CY is 4. And then we know that in the first 14 years, we're making deposit of $94 at the end of every 3 months. So $94 is our PMT, that's our payment. That payment is repeated at a regular time interval. So that's why we have the PMT, $94 in the first 14 years. And then this is at the end of every 3 months. So at the end of every 3 months, that means our payment per year is 4 times a year. So we made a total of 4 payment in 1 year. So that's why our PY is 4. Our payment per year is 4 times a year. So when you're reading the question, you need to know where to get the PY and where to get the CY. Right now, PY and CY are the same, but in the next chapter, they're not going to be the same. So you need to know where to get the PY and where to get the CY. So the PY comes from the payments per year. So it's always near the payment, it's always near the PMT. That's where you get the PY. Payment at the end of every 3 months. So this is at the end of every 3 months. So this is repeated at the end of every 3 months. So PY, payment per year, is 4 times a year. And then our CY comes from the compounding. It comes from the interest rate. So 5% compounded quarterly. So our CY is 4 times a year. Our compounding per year is 4 times a year. So you need to know where to get the PY and where to get the CY. PY is near the payment. CY is usually near the interest. And then next, we're going to calculate the N. N is 56 for the first 14 years, and how we get the 56. is that you need to know the formula for N when we have payments, when there is PMT. When PMT is not 0, then our formula for N is N equals to T times PY. So that's what you need to know. And in previous chapter, we learned that when there's no payments, our N equals to T times CY. That was the case when we have no payments. But when we have payments, what you need to know now is that when there's payments, then N equals to T times PY. In this chapter, PY and CY are the same, but once we get to the next chapter, they're not going to be the same. So your result will be different if you use the incorrect formula. So remember, when there's a payment, N equals to T times PY. So T is 14 years, PY is 4 times a year. So we're making payment, PY is 4 times a year. So 14 times 4 will give you the 56. So that's where we get the N is 56. Once we have the first line filled out, then we can plug it into the financial calculator, and then we can solve for the future value for the first 14 years. So we start from the left side. We start with the PY and CY. Second function, PY. PY is 4, so 4, enter, arrow down. CY is 4, so 4, enter. And then we clear, bottom left corner. And then we start typing in the N. N is 56, so 56. And then press N. And that will set your number of period to 56. IY is 5, so 5, IY. And then there's no present value. Present value is 0. We don't have any money at the beginning. Our present value is 0. So we put 0 present value. And then we have 94 for PMT. So 94 PMT. And then we're solving for future value. So we press compute future value. You can get 7557.86. And that's your future value at the end of the first 14 years. Once we calculate the future value at the end of the first 14 years, what you need to know is that now that future value becomes the present value for the next 10 years. So that's why our future value at the end of the first 14 years becomes the present value for the next 10 years. And that's the connection point between the first time period and the second time period. And in the next 10 years, we have no payments, PMT is 0. When there's no payments, our PY equals to CY, so that's why our payment per year is 4 times a year, and that equals to the CY. And when there's no payments, our N equals to T times CY. So we have N equals to T times CY. So we have 10 years times CY times 4, so 10 times 4 gives you the 40. So again, when there are no payments, so in the last 10 years, when there are no payments, then our N equals to T times CY. So that's why we have the 10 times 4 gives you the 40 for the last 10 years. In the first 14 years, we have payments. When there's payments, then our N equals to T times PY. So that's why we have the 14 times 4. We have the 14 years times the PY of 4. That gives you the 56. So make sure you know the difference. When there's no payment, when PMT equals to 0, N equals T times CY. When there's payments, then N equals to T times PY. So once we have everything filled out, then we can solve for the future value. So second function, PY. PY is 4, CY is 4, so 4, enter, go down, CY, 4, enter, then you clear, and then you're 40 for N, so 40, and then N, and the next number is 5, 5 is your nominal interest rate, so 5 IY, and then you have your present value, so present value is 7557.86, so 7557.86, that's your present value. And then PMT is 0, so 0 PMT. And then you solve for future value. So compute future value. You can get 12,422.24. And that's your future value at the end of 24 years. And that's part A. Part B, we're looking for how much will Cameron contribute. So we're looking for how much money did Cameron actually deposited. So we're looking for the total payments. And the total payment is basically N times PMT. So the total deposit that Cameron made was that he made 56 payments. He made 56 deposits, and each deposit is $94. So that's why we times these two numbers together, N times PMT, and that's how we get the $5,264. That's your total deposit. Part C, how much will be the interest? So the total interest earned is basically the future value minus the total payment. So our future value at the end of 24 years is 12,422.24. That's how much we're going to have at the end of 24 years. And then we made a total deposit or total payment of 5,264. So we subtract those two, and that will give us the interest earned. So our answer for part C is 7,158.24, and that's example 1.